All right, thank you everyone for joining us. I will have Mr. Kosma introduce himself first.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zachary Kosma. I am a video game developer, founder, and educator, currently based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I teach at Atlas School and I build video games. For some of my past, I'm completely self-taught. I graduated high school early, started working in startups, and since 8 years old, had been teaching myself how to make video games. So, been contracting, I've been working with many other studios, both contracting indie and building my own sense of what I'm going to do in games. So I have an announcement shortly after this that's been very exciting, but just the other details you might want to know about me. Born and raised in Virginia, moved to California, and I started a career in esports when I was 16. I was playing games like Insurgency and Overwatch. In fact, I played in the first match of the first Overwatch LAN tournament. And it was a brief stint in esports, but it was successful. It was fun. We placed at that very tournament Agents Rising in 2016, 9 out of 32 teams. So esports is something I carry very close to me. It's something that is, bound for my company in the future and hopefully, something that I think changes a lot of people's lives. So I'm here with Adam today to discuss, self-mastery, esports, video games, the world, how those things all kind of tie together, and to celebrate. So it's been 1 year into my mission of building my personal brand, Cosmico, and kind of stapling into the game industry our reputation and how we're going to make the world a better place through fun and play and entertainment and learning. So there's multiple aspects to it. We're still very early stage as a company. We're actually building our content engine called PlotIf right now that will be powering a lot of the narrative and multimedia connectivity of our experiences. And yeah, it's been super exciting to bring in my brothers to have established some early IPs and begun developing our audience. I'm really looking forward to Cosmico in 2026. We're only October. In fact, it's October 2nd as we're recording this. So we've got quite a little bit of time in the year left. More announcements coming soon, things that I'm very excited about. And at the end of the day, building a business, building something on your side in your free time, it takes a lot of self-mastery. It takes a lot of time. It takes things that aren't necessarily fun to go and produce these fun experiences. So it's been quite the adventure. Even, 1 year in, I try to advise most indie game studios and developers, hey, go do one game, go publish something within your first year. We've done two alpha releases, but the business is a little different because it's not any other game studio. I'm building this as a legacy for myself and my family. So it's a very different kind of goal and strategy that we take on as a startup because we're doing this to build intergenerational IP to really make games that matter. We call them games for good, and to do it in a way that feels sustainable and justifiable and not rushed or kind of doing things that we don't really believe in. So that's me in a nutshell and what I've been up to over the last year. And oh man, I think our last master self-mastery episode was not quite a year ago. It was like 8, 9 months ago or so. Is
Yeah,
that
eight
correct,
months
Adam?
ago.
Yes, yes. So I'm very excited to talk about it again. And in fact, there's so much news and development, and things going on in technology, things going on in the world culturally and politically that have totally, shifted, I think, a lot of people's relationship with information and with entertainment and how they spend their time. I think really people are spending their time so much differently in 2025 than they did in 2024. And to me, it's a deep reflection of self-mastery and the concepts that you and I come to talk about together, Adam.
Thank you, Zachary. The whole purpose of this podcast series, the Master Strategy Plan, is to give the audience, game developers, professional gamers, casual gamers, everybody in the video game ecosystem, the actual perspectives, the self-mastery skill sets that they can learn through your experience, Zachary, because you're one of the only people on earth who have lived the professional gamer life, and also you develop games and you know what it's actually like to experience this Ready Player One like world. So, without further ado, I'll get into the first question, which will be open ended. What are the three most important things you have to share with the world right now?
That's an amazing question. The three top most important things, if I had to boil it down, absolutely, universally, if we're talking for any potential listener that might be tuning in, um, number one, what's going on in technology is intense. We're talking uh, what I like to call kind of the biggest reinvention of the computer that we've ever seen. And it's taking what we've been able to kind of scope out and speculate on for computers for many years, decades even, and really applying it towards solutions, new user experiences, and fundamentally changing how we use data on a day-to-day business in every aspect of the world. I'm talking from consumers to business applications to very underlying technology platforming to even how and why we're assembling the circuit boards that go into graphic cards the way we do, right? We're fundamentally reinventing computers around artificial intelligence. This is probably the number one thing to know about what's going on in the world today. And when you think of artificial intelligence, we love to think about this from the software side, right? And that's very much what number one is about. It's about data and software and how we're able to string together experiences in your life that we may have never been able to do in a way before. You can imagine how that could completely change the world of advertising and how ads could mean something to you if we had a technology platform that was able to understand you. There's also another side of it of AI is completely reinventing the need for technology. We're building more data centers. That'll go into point two, but we're completely reinventing the priority on what we do with the computers that we have and where we're pipelining information and what we're spending our big amounts of business money and big tech money on. Prior to uh, AI and machine learning, we would call it user analytics. And all of these businesses would be doing huge amounts of user analytics to figure out what do we do for our features? What are our customers needing? Where's our product service and services breaking down? So AI is really the big reinvention of all of the great value additions that uh, tech has brought us over the last 25 years. And so cool, right? That's all software. What did I mean about hardware? Let's talk about point number two, the most important thing to understand going on in the world, and that is economics. So we talked about artificial intelligence. You really need to understand um, where money is going, how it's flowing, kind of a bit of the macro and the micro here. But really, the connection that we look for when I talk about economics is uh, kind of tied to a very popular saying called follow the money. So if we follow the money of AI, where is it going? Where is this actually happening? And this is not number one through three tips on how to profiteer off the world right now. This is the things that you must know as anybody residing here on Earth. So number two, following the money of artificial intelligence. Where's all that money going? First, we have to think about materials because nothing is in the cloud, as they kind of say. I taught a course on cloud computing at Atlas School this trimester of fall 2025, and one of the big details of the course was kind of demystifying what cloud computing is and coming away from the idea that we're shooting all of these messages up into space and that they're going back down. I mean, that happens with systems like Starlink. But when we think about cloud computing, really what is happening is Uh, your message is being sent to your nearest phone tower or through fiber or copper wires to a data center or to some sort of internet service provider facility that is routing your requests. And so when we think about follow the money of the cloud computing and the materials involved, we have more demand for data centers than we've ever seen. We have this huge amount of money flowing into the raw resources. We've known this for many years with big tech. I mean, your iPhones, your Androids, these are built with materials extracted from places like Africa and Southeast Asia, sometimes extracted by methods that aren't very nice to read about or to talk about, and that feel very uncomfortable because when you go and you follow the money of like, cool, how did Apple actually go and achieve the price that they can for their phones and subsidizing the cost of these expensive electronics initially? And it's not a very fun story to read about. Talking to, actual resources, lithium, um, you know, uh, your silicone for chips. All of this stuff has to come from somewhere. So, we know there's a bunch of economics going around tech, and at the very base level, there's a very huge deal recently between NVIDIA, Oracle, and OpenAI. We're talking huge scales of businesses. And when you break down the numbers of this, it's crazy. NVIDIA claims that for every $500 million invested into AI, there's a potential of over, I think, I guess I will quote on this, but their potential metric for your return on investment was $5 billion to your $500 million investment of AI around using it exclusively in mining crypto. That's a pretty crazy big number. So your investment into data centers and NVIDIA technology supposedly just has insane profit margins. That's what they're trying to get people to realize is there's a huge demand for AI and cloud computing in the future. So beyond the current scale of you can go and look up, on Google, where are all the deep sea cables, and you can see just how many deep sea internet fiber and non-fiber or non-optical cables that we have buried into the ocean, and really get an understanding that the current throughput and connectivity that we have does not meet our anticipated demand and even really current demand. And so we're going to see lots of more of the continuous things that have been happening over the last 25 years continue to happen. Really, it's been happening way longer than 25 years when we're talking the raw material side of computing and technology and where we're getting all of this, silicone from. But when we kind of fast forward and we're thinking ahead, no, we're going to need more. We're going to continue to buy in those industries. So following the money, right? The resource cost is huge and immense, and that's really what it comes down to people competing for. We see it affect even non-big tech, non-entertainment industries like automotive. Ford had a huge issue with their cars because all of your cars have computers in them nowadays. They had a huge issue with some of their trucks within the last 5 years and continuing on of supply chain, of where are they getting the materials to build the chips that they need for their trucks and for their new systems. So it's a very interesting kind of silicone race that we're seeing here. Um, and so cool, right? I talked about the materials. There's so many other sides of the economics of this. When you think about your computing, it is so different than cloud computing. On your computer, you could potentially run any number of apps. On your phone, you could potentially run any number of apps. You could go and write a program to do really anything, to run a simulation, if you will. And so you have this sort of free ability to go and simulate on your computer and execute processes. almost in infinitude. If you want to write, you can even go into the Apple Store and open up a terminal window and write a little program that runs endlessly just to see your simulations, right? And run the math. Fun stuff. This is what blockchain mining was about, right? The fact that we could decentralize computing and everyone could use their little personal computer to contribute to the network. And that's what torrenting is too, right? File sharing through a network. So cool. When we come to your computer being very different than the cloud, what does that mean? Well, if we're actually going to do a transfer from your phone as your medium of computing and interfacing every day on social media to something like glasses, well, we're discovering even if you try to minify everything as much as you possibly can, you're going to have issues. Mark Zuckerberg's tech demo proved this. Of you're not always going to get that call, right? And that's going to be very much the experience of cloud computing. Why? Because we're removing the computing from you. You as a user, as a consumer, no longer get a phone with a CPU and a GPU in it. You don't need to compute all your own processes. The idea here is if we're following the money and how you're actually going to get these glasses as an end user and it's going to be paid for and minified and experienced in a way that makes sense, all that computing is going to be offloaded of that device. You're going to be wearing thin little glasses that mostly are there for the connectivity to the cloud and your display. What does that mean? Right? Because that's very interesting. That means you won't have that free ability to simulate or run applications at your will anymore. It'll be much more like your Xbox experience. No, you can't run 3, 5, 10 games at once like you can on your Windows PC because you're on the Xbox. You're going to need to go launch the game that's currently, the CD's currently in, or the game that's installed. So it creates a different relationship with how we think about apps and the services that we use on our phone. And it is going to change a lot of the app market, right? We think about downloading apps on your phone. No, 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 no. Google got into a lot of trouble with charging. Google and Apple got into a lot of trouble with Epic Games and charging for apps the way that they did. How do you shift away from that? Well, we don't let the user install applications anymore, right? Instead, they access applications through our network. So cloud computing on the software side and AI on the software side is going to completely change consumer and day-to-day experience of basic economics that we're familiar with now. Your Uber ride is going to be a little bit different when your Uber driver won't have a phone and instead is wearing glasses, or there's an interface built into their car. Or if, Waymo takes over and we have more self-driving cars. It looks different. And all of that's fundamentally cloud. So again, thinking about the economics of this, so we have the spend on materials and we have the shift in consumer experience and consumer spend. There's going to be a big, big spend on an AI kind of weapons race as we think of it. So to give people grounding, because they may not know that this is how technology develops. Most of our modern technologies were developed from wartime needs and from conflict. So we jump back to things like Tor and the deep internet. That was invented as a technology for the US Navy. When we think about races in technology, different countries or companies or people competing in not a market for games, but something a little bit bigger that's encapsulating the market, the actual field, let's say, the field of weapons, right? That's a race. And so you have all of these people competing in this race, trying to get the best weapons that they can. Why? Because the idea is that if you are leading the race, you kind of get to set the rules, especially if it's a race like weapons, right? Because supposedly, if we kind of abstract away what does a government mean and what's their function in the total field outside of what we kind of associate with governance, it's a monopoly on violence, right? They have a monopoly on enforcement. They have a monopoly on regulation. They have a monopoly on the biggest potential violence that you can do. And there was this idea of mutually assured destruction, madness, right? That keeps the world going. Um, Dr. Strangelove, right? And that if we all have these great, huge, powerful weapons, well, then like the race just becomes like, well, need to keep improving on the weapons, supposedly such that like we could threaten to take each other out if someone does something bad. And now we're in this entrenched race of how do we both increase our capacity for a threat range while also being able to subvert other people's threat ranges. And it's in the past a very, very physical border that we fought on. But I think in the future it'll be a much more digital border that we compete on. And that's in a positive and a negative way, right? Because we're talking about money spent on AI. Of course, there's going to be huge government spending on AI, right? Because in the past, what was secret intelligence warfare? That was sending, people into another country to go do clandestine operations, and that's expensive. It takes really special training. You have to get through customs and migration policies, and there's just so much that is involved in doing an operation like that. But clandestine or corporate espionage in the modern day does not require nearly as many resources. I mean, it's all on the clouds, right? So if it's already on a cloud server and I can figure out some employees' access to your cloud systems and I can give myself the right role or permissions and I can do anything I could potentially want in your cloud. That's the world that we live in today. And so we moved from a sense of there's this physical threat range we need to maintain, and that's still very much there. And I mean, you can go and look into military operations and how borders and relationships are maintained around that. It's very interesting stuff. And for the most part, for countries that are playing nicely together, like systems of NATO, right, you don't get that many problems. You get problems when you have agitators, and that's fundamentally how we want the system to move forward, because eventually we'll kind of remove all of the agitators from competing in the market. We'll be able to set some fairer rules, or maybe demilitarize is the idea. But coming back again to the technology and the AI side of this and why it's impactful for anyone on Earth, uh, countries need to protect themselves with technology. They need to figure out a way to prevent cybercrime, to prevent corporate espionage, to secure their data, to secure their citizens' data, to secure the data of foreign occupants who come into the country as tourists, as workers, under visas or not. Because fundamentally, if another country passes a regulation that protects their citizens' data as they travel internationally, other countries would have to have some sort of system like NATO or the EU, some sort of regulatory body to administer and say, hey, in international law, you're not allowed to take this person's data in that way. And so we live in a very, very complicated world, very, very complicated future. Why the economics of this is important to understand is because fundamentally, everything follows the money. We're not talking that there's this magic spirit of ethics or ethos or egalitarianism that ultimately guides governments towards a better future. We could hope there is that, but that is a very kind of, I would say, Eastern philosophy way of thinking, and removing the activity of being that change in the world. And I think very much when we think about that transfer and that difference, we don't want to limit ourselves to the idea that everyone is working on the problem, or the problem is going to get solved, or that organizations are necessarily tied to their goals. There's a difference in the idea of things being written down and everyone agreeing on that same page, and the difference of how things come into being and how things are actually being done. And so, carrying forward the idea that Well, there is no great egalitarian future unless we actually put the actions in there. We have to consider the consumer, the relevant impact of this for you is not that, oh, all of these economics are going to be happening in the background, but that they are going to fundamentally change your day-to-day experience and the way that you have to spend money. Things like wars make you spend your money differently. And so why does a race in AI technology matter? Because that same threat range ability, if I have the data that tells me that I could take over your country in 3 days because of how you're conducting your military operations, and I know this because I've planted bugs in your military operation and I can see the information that you think is hidden, then what's to stop me from taking that advantage? This idea that I'm talking about is the same exact principle used by Putin in the current ongoing war in uh, Ukraine. So it's kind of crazy to think about, but zooming in on what does that mean? Uh, they've planned to take Ukraine in 3 days. They had information, they had cyber connections, they had establishment that made them think we can achieve this. And so they acted upon it. Obviously, it's taken a lot more than 3 days, and it's still an ongoing war. Lives are being lost every day, and it's an awful, aggressive atrocity. And so pulling back and saying, well, consumer impact, yeah, war of course impacts you. Well, AI is going to impact you. It's going to be the jobs that your family gets, that you have access to, that are in the economy around you. And so thinking about that, if your country is not spending on AI, they open up these threat ranges for potential aggressors to assert and have information that says that they can pull off aggressions and kind of let them go away to history or just, the raw power of their success. This is what led to the really rapid rise of the German fascist regime, right? Was they were successful. And that engineering, that ingenuity, that success, that, planning and operations really went far. And so to summarize number two in economics of AI and why it's relevant, you have to follow the money. You have to know what the people around you are spending their money on, because if no one is coming to the store that day to buy eggs, and the next day and the next day and the next day, those eggs are going to go bad. That's bad for the business owner, but it might be good for you, the only person buying eggs, right? And you have to think about it not just on your micro scale, but on the micro scale, on the macro scale of where are other people's money being spent at? Where are these countries' resources actually going, and what's happening? So number three most important thing to understand in the world going on right now, I think, is conflict. Um, it's an uncomfortable conversation. It's not a fun one. I don't think anyone is, conflict tolerant. I think everyone in their own way is very conflict averse, because that's what defines conflict. And so I'm not talking necessarily martial conflict, but I do definitely want to highlight martial conflict. I think, again, connecting the dots of all of the changes in AI and all of the economics around it to write your third point here. Why does AI impact my sense of being? Why does this change the day-to-day life? And I really like how Adam expresses some of this in his vision. He calls our modern day reality Ready Player One. And I think this fits so well because we live in a place that's fundamentally cyberpunk. In fact, I don't even think we're there yet. I think we're like alpha cyberpunk. We're testing out the waters before we go full neon and cybernetics and wearables and integration of technology and net running. Like our IoT, our Internet of Things, is still very, very early infantile stages. But it is a very good place to realize that's where we're at. And it's actually a lot closer to something like Ready Player One than it is Cyberpunk 2077. Because in Ready Player One, Ernest Cline was very intentional to say this is science fiction, but to still paint it in a world that felt very close and real. And there was, if you go and watch it, there's nothing fundamentally science fiction about the experience now. We have haptic suits. They were used in the shooting of the movie. We have more and more advanced VR. We have so many things that we can accomplish in VR that most consumers aren't even aware of. You can have people imprisoned in a warehouse in VR and be walking for miles, not even running into each other. You can have people doing PTSD and therapy experiences in VR. You can do surgeries in VR, right? The expanse of that is incredible. So our third point, our third most important thing for consumers or for anyone to recognize in this world is that you're going to play a big role. That all of this is intricately involved in your life, and that it could feel like conflict. So when I say conflict, there's a lot happening in the world, and it may not be affecting you personally. So I'm going to highlight a few different things that I think are big conflicts that you need to worry about, but also how they affect you personally. I'm going to start with the personal. So one, misinformation. It's everywhere. AI is proliferating it everywhere. And it's not just AI. This has been a problem humanity has dealt with since we invented social structures. And that is subversion, it is lies, it is kind of twists of truth. And there's so many ways that you can combat this, but really the only thing you can do to combat it is to master yourself, to have deep critical thinking and assessment skills that prevent you from going down certain rabbit holes, from, trying to twist the idea that logical fallacy exists into your ability to defeat other people in arguments. Like that's not what debate is fundamentally about, actually. It's not about the logical fallacies and twisting them on each other. There's all of this stuff that happens around conflict that's really hard to deal with because conflict tends to stem from a lack of information, an incomplete picture, misinformation, lies, deceit, or even information that enables aggression or predatory responses or abuse. So um, misinformation is really big, and you'll see it everywhere. It's affecting the U.S., it's affecting China, it's affecting everywhere you go. I mean, in the U.S., it's nice because we have some ability, right, to go out and use the internet and find our own sources and be free, right, in that way to learn and be free to adopt misinformation, be free to adopt any religion, be free to use our voices in ways that are funny, parody, maybe harmful to an extent that it's, legal, right? And we have that freedom as Americans, and of protest, right? Those are things that we have. And in China, your access to information is limited. You don't get the freedom to just go Google anything. You don't get to know about Tiananmen Square or various things that have happened in your history or in the world. And what does that mean? Well, that means you're only given access to the misinformation. And so misinformation is really important, and its role in conflict is really important for anyone to understand because it's prevalent everywhere, and so much of the economics around AI is built and based in misinformation. And that's why when people talk about there's a current bubble, that's what they're talking about, is there's a bubble of misinformation going on in artificial intelligence that is inflating it beyond the reality that we observe. Now, the reality that we observe is principles one and two are still true. It's affecting us in every consumer experience every day, and there is so much economic proof to this. But Nonetheless, there is still an inflation. So cool. There's misinformation out there. What's the other kind of conflict, physical abuse. I'm talking domestic warfare, everything. It's way out there. It's crazy. We're talking Yemen has been oppressed. We're talking Palestine has been oppressed. We're talking Ukraine has been oppressed by war and by the lack of globalism to care about addressing conflict. Globalism is all about making money. We'll do globalism all day as long as it makes corporations money and increases GDPs in aligned countries. Uh, cool, but we're not going to go in and do all of the diplomacy that needs to happen. We're going to leave that to the countries to do diplomacy when they actually have a need to do diplomacy, and for organizations like the Olympics or FIFA or Amnesty to go and do that diplomacy that happens and needs to happen passively that maybe no one else really wants to do. And so it's tough, right? Thinking about conflict, because when there's conflict in your home, I mean, we have resolution methods, right? There's tools and systems to help you until there's not. Until you live in a society that oppresses women and you're a female and you can't get help or access to help in the same ways for various problems. And so, cool, that's the individual meter. Let's scale that up, right? There's an inherent conflict in the two country solution or in the two-state solution between Israel and Palestine, right? There's reasons that there's conflict and that these things are persisting, and it's generally not good. No one's comfortable with conflict. No one likes that this is going on. But the people who are at most involved and mostly involved with the conflict are the ones really experiencing it and who have to deal with it where others don't. I think that's what's really powerful about the Sumud flotilla and like Greta Thunberg's work, right? Is the idea that hey, I do have some audience or voice or attention and ability to capture people's attention, and I'm going to direct that to the people who are actually most in conflict and most needing support and the things that such awareness, support, and infrastructure can provide them, like a crap load of baby formula and food that is currently some of which is being blocked, some of which is making its way to Palestine as we speak, right? This is very big conflict going on in the world. And though you may be in America experiencing things like my eggs are going crazy expensive, or there's a school shooting happening going on, you have to think about, well, what's it like for a family in China? Family in China, they might not have too much going on, or they might have a community in crisis. We are very familiar with the story of Flint, Michigan in America and their water crisis. We are not very familiar with the communities in crisis in China. Neither are Chinese communities very familiar with communities in crisis in China. It is something that gets swept under the rug because conflict's uncomfortable and people don't want to talk about it. And especially in a nationalist society where you really want to show people, hey, we're a strong nation. We're really proud of what we're doing. You're not going to always want to broadcast that you have communities in crisis because, hey, that does that defeat the nationalist view? In my view, we need to be more conflict tolerant because all of this adversity to conflict is what creates these uncomfortable scenarios, is what makes it hard for a country that wants to be nationalist and proud of what it does to look at how they can still be nationalist but benefit from globalist structures or support systems and how that doesn't take away from their identity. And so again, it's very complex, right? You can think about these dynamics more easily on a family structure. Your neighbor, you might not respect them, sort of like Homer maybe didn't always respect Ned Flanders until there were moments that they shared, that they had, that they experienced, that showed them, hey, we can actually be more conflict of the tolerant. Uh, uh, we could be more tolerant of the conflict that we have between each other and benefit from that and see solutions we may not have seen before. This is the fundamental unit of diplomacy, right? Is how do we move from aversion to tolerance? Now, taking a step back from that and back from the intense conflicts going on in the world, like war and all of that, there is social conflicts. So we talked about misinformation, we talked about physical. Now we need to talk about social. Social conflicts are huge, and these are awful, and they become economic. They do all of these awful things. Um, Jumping back to physical really quick, in Saudi Arabia, right? They have an ongoing issue measured by tons of countries. I'm talking over 32 countries have all come together to agree there is a fundamental workers' rights issue. Now, this sounds like a social issue, right? Because workers' rights, oh, that's like, your time at work, it's sort of economic and all this. No, no, this is a physical conflict issue. We are seeing African migrant workers go to Saudi Arabia and come back in coffins and come back with uh, reasons for their death that don't match their actual autopsy. They say they die of peaceful or natural causes when there's evidence of torture on these bodies, and that's awful. And it's predominantly affecting Black women who are migrating to go feed their family and work, right? And you're given this promise of come to this country, you'll fix your life, you'll fix your work, or you'll get a career, you'll be able to send money back home, you'll be able to eat, you'll be able to do all of these things that aren't currently happening in your country because of systems of oppression. Come to our kingdom where you can change your life. And that's a great offer. And Asian people, African people are coming out in droves to go work in Saudi Arabia because they're building these mega cities. They have all of these new shops and services and restaurants and things, hotels that need people to work them, right? So this is a great boon until you aren't paid, until you are locked up in a housing facility that doesn't actually have beds for all of the workers they've assigned to this housing facility, that where you get sexually abused by your employer. These are things that are happening every single day, documented and undocumented, and it is horrifying to think about. And it's not just Saudi Arabia, but this is probably one of the biggest documents and like active kind of global awareness around abused migrant workers. And it's awful. Think about having your visa rescinded while you're still in that country when you haven't been paid and you have no ability to navigate yourself outside of that country or to get your papers to go to customs back to your home. It's crazy to think about. I don't think about this as an American. I don't have to deal with this. The things I have to deal with are, do I have enough time to go to church? Are my eggs more expensive? I have different kinds of conflict. And not that my conflict is wrong or that it doesn't qualify as conflict, but it's certainly not this level of physical and economic. It's not as consequential, it doesn't feel like. I could not experience a day. I could just sleep at home and it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But for someone who's in active crisis, for them to miss a whole day, if they, let's say, got abducted by a enforcement officer for a day, right, and then they got home, that completely changes their world and economic capability and ability to move because they're fundamentally not existing and thinking like we are. And this is the same problem as homelessness. A homeless person does not have the ability to think and form plans because they're in survival mode. Their brain is fundamentally so trapped in the moment that they are surviving as you speak. You think about Les Stroud, so Survivor Man staying alone on an island recording himself, not Bear Grylls with a T, but actually alone, subsisting. He goes a little crazy sometimes because there's nothing to really think about necessarily than to just survive and figure out whatever that means in that moment. Do I need to be building my structure right now? No, I don't have time. Oh, I need to move because there's a storm coming in. It's the same exact experience that homeless people go through living on the streets. So they don't have the ability to form long-term plans. They aren't thinking it's okay if I lose a day, because for them the day is the entire experience that they're in. Um, versus if you do have a 30-year mortgage that you're paying for and a steady job and a career and kids who go to school every day, taking a weekend day for yourself to just not do anything is perfectly normal. And you don't actually think that much of it because it doesn't have consequences for you like that. And you are thinking at a much longer term scale. So it's very interesting, right, to understand these things and to understand that even someone who has all of this long-term thinking and capacity to build up a great path for themselves goes to a place like Saudi Arabia, gets a job in construction, doesn't get paid, gets their things taken away from them, and is fundamentally forced into a place where they must survive every day. And they have no ability to actually think of or conceive a plan of how to get home. This is what happens to homeless people. They get fired from their job, they miss a payment, they lose their apartment, their home. They're out with their dog. Eventually, they give their dog to a friend as they're couch surfing. They get kicked out couch surfing, and then they're stuck. And they don't actually have the ability to form a long-term plan of how do I get from this state or city that I was working in and living in back home to where I have family or support systems. They can't because they don't have the ability to think about it because they're too stuck in survival mode. So this is what they're doing to people. It is not just slavery. When people hear that word slavery, and that's what's happening in Saudi Arabia with these migrant workers, right? We make it mean all this stuff, but we don't actually think about the experience of it and how it captures people. And it's fundamentally capturing people, dehoming them, depersonalizing them, dehumanizing them to the point where it's like Animal Farm. You're treating them like an animal. You're getting them to work like an animal. You're domesticating them for your purpose. And that's horrifying. That is awful. That is one of the biggest conflicts and atrocities, in my opinion, going on today. We thought colonialism and slavery ended as we did things like abolish them. But really they changed, especially in America. We saw this was it went from, okay, you are a legally enforcibly slaved to now you are economically slaved. Now you are work for pennies. You work for things that aren't enough. You get a work contract that gives you your food, your place of living, and a minor pay because we're subsidizing those other things. And it's not good. It's not healthy. It's not sustainable. And it's abusive. Like these things are awful. So zooming back a little bit, thinking about, oh, why? Why all this? Why are we hurting this way? Why is there all this conflict? Why am I bringing it up? Is to connect it to the third point of social harm. Because, yeah, we don't experience that level of physical harm and slavery and outward violence in America. We do have school shootings. Sometimes we have 4 in a day across the nation. That's crazy, right? That's a lot of violence. But a lot of our violence is social over here in the Western world. And we like to pretend we're all polite because we won't call you out for things like being fat or being ugly or you know, looking a certain way like they might in the Eastern world or in a culture like China. But we'll subtly judge you for those things. We'll actually do a lot of silent social violence against people. And I'll tell you, it's a very interesting experience for me as an American, as a white American. I lived in San Francisco in the Bay Area. I saw more examples of outward, violently racial things said in the Bay Area in California than I have living in Oklahoma. Very weird, right? You wouldn't expect that. But on the other side of that, you can definitely observe social silent racism. It's not everywhere. I'm sure I don't experience it as much as someone who's not of color, but you could observe when it happens to other people, and that's it's out there somewhat. And I would say even as a white person, you can experience social. violence against you as a white person. It happens all the time. I think like you know, as for myself, I'm someone who's pretty tolerant, and I try to keep my mind open, but you'll still see these things happen. And is it wrong? Yeah, I don't think anyone should discriminate on race. It's not something you should discriminate upon something. And I also think it's something that is deeply part of someone's identity potentially, right? You don't have to make race part of your identity, but it could be. And who are you to try and take away part of my identity, right? My identity belongs to me and I broadcast it at work. And actually, there's an interesting relationship there between your identity and your reputation. Fundamentally, you don't own your reputation and you can't influence or manage or even understand your reputation. It is completely removed from yourself. You can only manage your identity and your relationship with your reputation. You think about it from that perspective, there's a very deep lesson in self mastery around how you relate to the world, and how you relate to your presence in the world, because you can't actually manage or control your reputation. Other people do that. It is something outside yourself. And so, again, coming back, thinking about why is this important to the everyday person and why is all this conflict important? You may not experience a lot of social violence. You may not experience a lot of physical conflict. You may not experience a lot of economic conflict. That doesn't make you less experienced than another human necessarily. It maybe in certain aspects you may be less experienced in physical violence. That does not mean you have less experience as a human. What this means is that you need to be tolerant of conflict. We can't be adverse to it because it's not going away. And certainly the aggressors, the people who are very, very, very tolerant of conflict and are actually producers of conflict, um, they aren't necessarily going away either. And so we need to think about how we as people and as an individual contributor in the grander ecosystem, right? I'm trying to break the Eastern and Western schools of thought. I'm not talking the community's going to do it, and I'm not talking you can do it all. There's a combination mix of the self and the communal body in achieving these goals. So you have to be involved, right? There's a fundamental shift in you need to be more tolerant of conflict. You need to be able to hold some of these things and frankly, uncomfortable topics in your head, to be able to navigate them, and to do so successfully. And you see so many problems with this. And as I wrap up here, I'm going to paint a problem that ties together all three of these things you must know. So there's a very famous video of MBS, the Prince of Saudi, right? The Crown Prince, the ruler of this nation, kind of the face of the brand Kingdom of Change for Saudi Arabia, where he's talking with an interviewer, and this journalist asks him about his opinion on sports washing and how people have claimed that sports washing is bad and the thing that he's doing and that is fundamentally distracting from other issues. This reporter was very, I would say, kind of strategic and not like mentioning what these problems are, but giving MBS a question in a way where it's very approachable for him to talk from his perspective on how the potential sports washing efforts or the bread and games show that he's doing relates to conflict in his country, right? Remove any sense that the conflict means anything, right? And just address that there is conflict going on in the country and that they're going to do this game show to bring a bunch of foreign money in. And there's claims that it could be distracting from that conflict. We're not even saying it is sports washing in this instance, in this thought experiment we're kind of doing. So MBS says, I will continue sports washing as long as it raises the GDP. If it sports washing raises the GDP 1%, then we will sports wash as much as possible as we can and never stop. Not verbatim, but basically what MBS's response was. And very close verbatim to the we will keep sports washing even if it only increases GDP 1%. So the idea here what he's effectively saying is that no, conflict doesn't matter. Growth matters. And we don't need to be tolerant to the conflict. We don't need to address the conflict. I don't need to accept that there's the potential that what we're doing has conflict to it. That doesn't matter. What matters is growth. And that's fundamentally adverse to conflict because you're not accepting it. You're not addressing it, and you're not saying that conflict is part of the solution or part of the problem. You're not saying that conflict is necessary. You're actually just trying even more to hide away from the conflict. Say, don't look at the conflict, look at the results, look at the impact. And that's so far from what a good response would have been. If I were MBS, and I fully believed in the sports that we were doing and why it was relevant to the country, and I got asked this same question of what would you do, or like, do you consider this as sports washing, or are you going to continue doing it? I would say what matters to me is that we're moving forward to a future with love and free from conflict, and that we can do so in a way that improves the lives of Saudi youth and people involved in our ecosystem. He did not say that. He said, I want to get more taxes. I want to get more GDP. This GDP is not a reflection of improving the lives of Saudi youth. If it were, he could just say that and say that my answer to sports washing is that I believe in Saudi youth and what we're doing and how we're changing the country, and these problems that you claim, eh, we're we're fixing it. We're moving forward. And so the three things you need to be aware of: AI is changing everything. The economics behind it are crazy. There's a bunch of conflicts in and around this that are completely shaping the world, how people are growing up, how they're learning, how they're being educated, how they're being entertained, and even what jobs are available to them. And then on the flip side of that, how that impacts their daily lives and your daily life. So those are the three things I think you should absolutely know and that are kind of essential to some level of self-mastery in the modern world. What a great question, Adam.
Thank you, Zachary, for your explanation. The master strategy plan for the first question. Those are three great and important topics, super important. I want everyone in the audience to know that in Ready Player One, we have to tie it back to this book because it's so imperative that you understand in this world, AI, artificial intelligence, has already taken the majority of the jobs. Artificial intelligence has already constructed so many data centers, and you can see the people living in these like, Chinese slash like compact facility homes, and they're like similar to like the Tesla small mobile homes that Elon Musk is developing. And you have to understand the blockchain technology that we have in our world is the same technology that they have in Ready Player One in order to circumvent that crazy amount of job loss, the layoffs, the studio closures for game development companies, because the Oasis became, it's literally modern day NVIDIA almost, or modern day Microsoft. So you have to think about the Oasis in Ready Player One as one of these major companies, and they're developing this technology right now in our world. And so you have to think about it from a perspective of if you're an actual player in this ecosystem, you can't just be an individual anymore. You have to be a sovereign individual. You have to think about it from the perspective Zach is saying. What do you do in a situation where AI takes your job? Do you actually have to go and play video games now because you're actually a good video game player and you can earn more money doing that? Like that's a real scenario where you have to think about your hobbies as something that you can beat AI at, because AI probably can't beat Zachary in the past when Zachary was a professional gamer. But now AI is getting to the point where it can beat chess grandmasters. And so you have to think about these new video games coming out. AI won't have mastered them yet. And that's your opportunity as just a casual gamer. That's your opportunity where, as anybody around the world, you can go on your smartphone and you can play one of these new games. You can earn a living. And you might use blockchain technology so you can get paid in different currencies that have a higher value than the currency in your country. So it's not just about the fact that there's conflict, it's the fact that there's conflict, but also concrete solutions to the conflict. But people don't want to recognize that you have to actually address the conflict first before you get to experience the solutions on a humanitarian planetary level. And so I want to lead this into the second question, Zachary. Why exactly do you believe sports diplomacy is the correct answer when organizations like PIF, owned by Saudi Arabia, is not following your framework for a healthy, sustainable, and ethical business of video games and esports?
That's a great question. And wow, there's a lot to potentially unpack there. But I want to keep it really digestible. So, number one, the biggest thing is I don't think any sort of monopoly or centralizing force is sustainable, especially in things like capitalist markets. Like our Oracles, our Google Apples, all of these things are always disrupted, and the monopoly is not sustainable. I mean, Peter Thiel will have lots of opinions on this one, and most of the business world have read his opinions, 0 to 1, of how monopolies stay stagnant, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. Um, so what do I mean with monopoly, right? Well, take a look at what PIF is doing, and their strategy around games. And you'll observe this kind of in tandem with some of the country's goals. So, well, their strategy in games in tandem with the country's goals. So, um, since around 2020, they have been talking about a Vision 2030 for Saudi Arabia. So prior to all this, I even think that MBS quote I pulled was from 2019 or 2020, if I remember correctly. But they've been leading up to this for a while, and they said, okay, 2020 construction and zoning and all this is going to start for the vision of 2030 of Saudi Arabia. We're going to call ourselves the Kingdom of Change. And we're going to move this brand new direction for ourselves and our laws and our culture and people and bring more freedoms and empowerment to all of them, right? It's a huge grand vision and it's pretty cool. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like their marketing materials for it are great. Like you go and look at some of the ArcViz concepts for Neo, their giant super city that they're building in the country, and it's cool as heck. I mean, it was really genuinely impressive and ambitious work. Um, and like that vision, that branding of a capture kingdom for change really enraptured people. So they're going this brand new giant direction. What does that mean and why? Well, I'll tell you where I live currently, Tulsa is doing the same thing. We also have a 10-year plan that we started in 2020, ending in 2030 to say, let's pivot our economy from oil-based to tech-based. And that's the same exact marketing and strategy laid down by the Kingdom of Change is we're going to change from an oil-based economy to a tech-based economy. Fundamentally, this natural resource from our country kept us and enriched us for thousands and thousands of years or whatever, and now we're here and we're going to establish this kingdom that we've had for hundreds and hundreds of years, profiting off of oil, and pivot into tech. So most important things to know are the AI economics and conflict sides of this. Who do they have to step on to get there? What is the money going to come from? Where are the materials going to come from? And how could we power this all with AI so that we could spend less money on the human resources being involved and utilized to undertake these efforts? Um, so big acquisitions need to happen, right? Now, Saudi is not going to be able to go acquire a huge infrastructural component to technology like Accenture or Google or Microsoft or Alibaba or any of these big tech companies that run a lot of infrastructure, right? Why? Because those companies are deeply buried and committed to existing establishments, and they've become international organizations themselves. So the PIF, right? If you're the public investment fund and you're saying, well, we want to be a part of this big AI open grandiose future, what are we going to do? Well, let's build our own data centers. Cool, that will take a crap load of money and resources. Who else could we acquire that has infrastructure in other countries? Because we could spend all that money here, but then we're going to be spending a bunch of our money setting up infrastructure in every other country, and then we're not necessarily spending money in Saudi. Because though we might set up that infrastructure, is it actually bringing dollars in, or now are we just routing other people's traffic? So there's a big infrastructural question around the AI and cloud computing side of it. And they say, hey, what's an easy way for us to acquire existing infrastructure or people who run a lot of data on existing infrastructure that we aren't competing with nations' governments to buy out their science and R&D, to buy out their tech infrastructure and their, Jeff Bezos's and Elon Musk, right? What are we going to do? Well, how about a super hot, underserved technology market that's actually way scaled beyond the revenue margins of others, right? So it's a cash crazy business in an industry, and it runs a lot of not just infrastructure, but when we talk about infrastructural needs for this industry, they transfer so much data live. They're storing so much data. Users are generating so much data because the products are interactive and they're huge consumer markets. Some of them are free, some of them are premium. There's like so much buzz going on in this industry, and it's actually taking over another really, really important industry for Saudi. That really important other industry is education, right? So this is an industry that's hugely tied to education. And cool, what is this industry? What is this thing that we're talking about that has all of this cool tech infrastructure that maybe isn't as tied to governments as all of the other things that we could potentially acquire? It's video games. It's electronic arts, and it is Scopely, and it is the companies that are publishing games internationally. Why? Well, game technology is really close to education. It impacts people culturally. A lot of these studios and companies and a lot of this technology gets rolled into learning management systems, and a lot of the future of education is an interactive learning and 3D learning. And so there's a huge appreciation for, if we're going to want to revolutionize Saudi education in the future, let's do it with technology, right? And let's pioneer some of that. So there's an educational piece, there's a cultural piece, there's an economic piece, but the biggest of them all, in my opinion, was the infrastructure piece. Because how are you, as a country who doesn't have all of that tech infrastructure owned by you and you're running all this stuff, get involved? Well, you're going to go acquire some businesses. And games are a good one to acquire because their servers are expensive. They don't like paying for their servers because it's hard to monetize their products around live service models. And big thing is, the user data analytics side of it is way undertapped and huge. On mobile, it's insane. And I mean, that's a lot of Scopely's business, right? Is Monopoly Go and doing the math and data to get people addicted to this little social casino mobile game. And so they're taking a look at that, which it's crazy to me that like they outlaw these things like gambling, yet they're doing loot boxes and and uh, social casino games like Monopoly Go. I'm like, doesn't this seem a little bit of like anti-Abrahamist values? Like, it doesn't necessarily need to be anti-Christian or anti-Islam, but like, really, is this taking advantage of people through entertainment products really the representation of good and change that the kingdom is wanting to do? Maybe. I don't know. So we take a look at what they're doing and why they're doing it. They're trying to buy out all of this complex game infrastructure so that they could turn it into AI and cloud services and have easier access to data centers and connectivity and fiber networking that they don't have to pay for all themselves. So, hey, there's a huge infrastructural piece there. Second, there's a huge cultural piece. Games, to me, and to many people around the world, are the most important form of media. They're more important than movies because you interact with it. You get to put a piece of yourself in them. They're more important than music because the games have the ability to bring people together online in a way that socializing about music doesn't facilitate in the same way. And there's so much involved in making these products that in themselves they are music and movies and other art. So it is a kind of more encompassing art form. So games are hugely important. And in fact, beyond that, they're hugely important to youth. This makes them cultural gold because if you can connect to youth, that means your 10-year plan will be running and operating upon that very youth that you are pushing into it. So you want to influence the culture and the thoughts and the behaviors of the youth that you are indoctrinating into your 10-year plan or goal or in your kingdom of change so that they can understand or see the world the way you want them to. Now, so there's a huge propaganda, cultural assimilation piece, and that in itself is so unsustainable. But each element of this is unsustainable. The third piece is cash. Games make a crap load of money. MBS himself plays video games, and there's an interest from the public fund on getting really quick returns on investment, and things that can help fund the 10-year plan as they're building it, or kind of the next 100 years as they kind of make it something that would be sustainable. So they acquired huge things like Scopely and Neontic. Because why Neontic? Not because it's a game company, but because of the geospatial data and infrastructure that Neontic has to offer them. That is probably, in my eyes, one of the biggest, most meaningful acquisitions they could have made outside of acquiring Google or something like that. Neontic is huge for its future of location-based games, services, data, simulations, interconnectivity between different services, and yeah, it's going to be pretty crazy. So we're taking a look at the huge scale of these industries that they're buying and attempting to take up, and it is not sustainable. Why? Because there's a reason these businesses were built outside of the deserts of Saudi Arabia. There's a reason that the teams and the talents behind this came from other places. There's so much, if we go back to conflict, there's so much social, physical, and kind of circumstance that pushes Saudi Arabia away from being able to facilitate this in the way that they're planning. They're trying to develop something called sustainability and longevity without actually considering how those things come across. So when big businesses like Google operate, they're operating in not the scale of quarterly plans, they're operating in scales of 10 decades, right? They need to make sure this company stays around for a long, long time. So how do you do that? How do you build that way? Companies are very, very different than governments and public right institutions because they just fundamentally are. They're for profit or they're for other reasons, or they shift and change. Every organization will shift and change. And that's something I think companies are a little bit more adjusted and capable of than governments. They can change a lot easier. So you look at the public fund, and if you were to want to build a sustainable ecosystem, you would need developers developing the products. You need publishers publishing the products. You would need consumers to buy the products. And then you would need education to continue to turn your consumer base into producers so that you don't just run out of producers eventually. So there's very important sequencing here of to build something sustainable, you need not just the money coming in and guaranteed to be coming in, but that money coming in through things like recession or natural disaster or things like that. And that means fundamentally decentralizing your ecosystem. You can't have it be too central because then you're subject to failure. You need to be able to distribute it And I mean, Neom is one city. That's how they want to paint it, right? That's fundamentally not sustainable, especially when it's like, well, yeah, meet me in Neom, but actually that means there's 10 different cities. It's like saying, let's go meet in New York City this evening. Adam, you have no idea where we're meeting. We need to specify, like, come find me in Queens, right? Like, you would need to have some specificity there. And New York as an ecosystem was not made sustainable by just building up Manhattan. That's not how it works. It was not even sustainable by just building up New York City. They had to build up New Jersey. They had to go build up Rhode Island and the surrounding areas and ecosystems and places where other materials are coming in and other economics are coming in. And for games, Saudi Arabia is missing so much to build something sustainable, especially in a niche like esports, because esports is so different. This is diplomacy. This is games. This is shows. This is consumer audiences. This is advertising. This is entertainment. This is competition. This is careers for people playing video games and going out there and achieving. This is so different than just games. So again, coming back to, well, why are they even doing esports? Because we kind of need to understand that as a piece of this whole games thing, because they could have just done all the games thing and not cared about the esports side of it. It's the big cultural cash cow for them. It's the idea that we could put things on a stage and show and influence people such that 10 years from now, no one will think of esports as something that was invented by Riot Games in America and pioneered through them doing a franchising model and figuring out how to localize their tournaments. No, that was sort of sustainable because Riot Games was saying we're not going to try and do everything too early. We're going to do it as it comes to us. And we're going to figure out a way in a relationship with the right entities to do this year over year. Now, the Saudi Arabian view is very different because we're going to run this big tournament. We're going to influence these people for the next 10 years from these tournaments. And we're going to have a vision of esports 10 years from now that it wasn't Riot Games who pioneered and built esports, but it was Saudi Arabia who viewed the potential of it and decided to invest in it and build the games. And what is that messaging? That's that the messaging is the kingdom of change is so great that they can just go and acquire any industry, no matter how culturally deeply embedded that industry is somewhere else, and do it 10 times better than everyone else because they're Saudi, because they're the kingdom of change, because our nationalist views tell us our country is the best and that this globalist effort was pioneered by us, our very nationalist country. That's so cool and neat and all, but it's not sustainable. Why? How much attendance was there for FIFA in South Africa 2010? Huge amount. It totally rivaled the energy, the cultural appreciation, the how it was shared between adults and their kids and their families. It culturally, right? That cultural element of soccer, so different than the World Cup in Qatar. Because I mean, it was sports washing. It may not have been sports washing in 2010. Why? It's the same organization. I mean, FIFA's been doing this shit for years and there's tons of corruption, right? But was it sports washing in South Africa in 2010? What makes that difference? How do we know? We don't necessarily. But what we can say is that the cultural impact of 2010 was a lot greater and more substantial and more reaching of people. It had a EA video game that was way better. In my opinion, one of the best FIFA games ever made was the 2010 World Cup one. And it ingrained and impacted people so much because they used proper music. They brought in the right artists. They brought in electronic arts at the perfect time to go and make a game that really mattered and represent the athletes. And those athletes' families played those games and celebrated the athletes and shared that with their families and the people that they're connected with. And so there's something huge about sports and its connection to culture that not even games gets by itself. And so why is it unsustainable? Because you can't ask a consumer base like gamers to want to be misinformed. And there's a very particular reason for this, Adam, and it's so based in game design. It's very interesting. Games are different from a puzzle or a toy. This is Keith Burgun's clockwork game design theory. I really like it. I use it as a model often. Uh, Games are so different than puzzles and toys because a toy, there's zero information to the game. It doesn't matter. You don't need any information to play it. It's a toy. You mess around with it. That's a sandbox. You do whatever. A puzzle is totally anti-toy. It's so opposite because there's a dedicated solution. You are given 100% of the information about the puzzle, and there is one solution or multiple, but there's a solution in there that you have to find. And it's not like a toy where it's free roam and there's no goal. There is a discrete set goal for a puzzle. A game exists somewhere in the middle because a game gives you incomplete information. You don't have all of the information to understand what the impact of your choices will make. In the Telltale series, you may not know that sacrificing one character gets you a certain benefit versus another. In StarCraft, when we're playing with Fog of War, we inherently don't know what build the other team's doing. We might know the race that they picked and some of the available strategies for that race, but that lack of information is what makes it a game. If you had a game of StarCraft without Fog of War against an AI that did the same build every time, it wouldn't be a game anymore. It would just be a puzzle. You know exactly what they're building, where they're building it, and it's your discrete goal to beat it, and you have 100% of that information. So a game is in the middle because you have misinformation. You have incomplete information. You have to form your own sense of the picture. And so if you have people who are naturally inclined to experiences and products where they have to form their own sense of the picture, put together the thing, and make their own choices, you're going to have certain principles that attracts. And typically, it's pretty egalitarian stuff. I mean, we see games like Life is Strange and Lego video games and wonderful communities in MMO that tell in World of Warcraft that tell these awesome stories of fantasy, right? And we're bringing in all this love and entertainment and socializing and people kind of finding their identity in a game, even if it's a game like Baba Is You, that's so like puzzly and different. It reaches you at this cultural level of like I'm getting to make my own choices and I'm getting to discover myself within the game. And the game means something. And we go back to why do you run brand circuses? Why are you entertaining people? And a gladiator arena is sort of entertaining because you have like it's indeterminate. You know, one fighter might win, the other might lose, and you might have a bunch of information, but it's still like it's a thing going on, and it's a game because you don't know what the opposing gladiator is going to do, and you're figuring it out. You're fighting. So this you can drone out. It's not interactive, right? Like you're watching it, right? And this is esports. This is a big struggle with esports, right? It is the people who play the video games enjoy playing the video games. It does not necessarily mean they enjoy watching the video games. You might enjoy playing soccer. Not everyone enjoys watching soccer. You might enjoy watching soccer. Not everyone enjoys playing soccer, right? So there's a difference there. And when we think about games as a medium, it's so different. When we're watching people play a video game on a stage, it's kind of different than watching someone play basketball. I could watch a professional athlete play basketball and be like, wow, they are so amazing, right? Like they did that. They achieved that. They are so athletic in that regard. And in video games, it's a little different. It's still athleticism. I could be like, wow, that CS player is incredible at hitting his shots. But it's also different because I'm not 7 feet tall. I'm not 6 feet tall. I'm not Kobe Bryant. I am not Michael Jordan. I do not have the skills and the background and the experience that they do to play basketball like they do, right? And I can still appreciate what they do, even though I don't, right? So I may not enjoy playing basketball as much as them, but I can enjoy watching them play basketball. Now that's interesting about games is it's completely different because fundamentally there's nothing about the input and design of a game that is exclusive to a certain kind of physicality or a certain kind of athlete or performance expectation. And so games are a little bit more accessible. And in that way, I think a lot of people find themselves in games because it's interactive and because they enjoy that. So when I'm watching CS, I can feel like that could be me that hit that shot. Now, I could totally imagine myself hitting a shot in basketball, right? That's a different thing. When it's in the video game, though, I can actually trace with the data, with the gameplay, every single kind of little micro decision that went in there to hitting that shot or planting that bomb in a way that you can't do in basketball. Basketball, you really need to be the athlete in a sense, and it's a physical sport, so you can't take that physical element out of it. But with esports and with that lack of physical element, it gives you this understanding that, well, I could develop those skills. I could be that person. I may never grow 7 feet tall. I may never, get the athleticism to play StarCraft at the same commands per rate that someone else does. But I can appreciate potentials. Anyways, removing it from the perspective of the individual, games are interactive. That's why they're so different than other sports, especially video games. And so when we make a sport out of a video game, it, the audience needs to be able to appreciate the interactions going on. I can appreciate the interactions going on in basketball. Easy. Most people, you grab a random person off the street, they won't be able to appreciate any of the actions in Counter-Strike beyond like hitting your shots, right? Like that's about it that they could experience of the game. And some people's experience of football is the same. They don't understand necessarily what it means to have a really great offensive line, and how that impacts the game, and why sacking someone on this time, a third down was important, right? Like they don't have that concept, but they could appreciate like catching a really long shot. And so there's these aspects of the sport and the various skills involved that anyone can appreciate and are universal. Those are so much more limited for games. Uh, they're not inherent in games like they are in physical sports. And so if you're asking people to watch it, they need to understand how the interactions are working and what it means for a player to be better than one or another, or where the skills are. And so they need to have interacted with the game, most likely. You aren't going to watch CS if you haven't played CS. You could be a bad CS player, you could be a good CS player, you could still enjoy watching it at the same level. If you're not a CS player, it makes it so much harder to watch. And in a way, like you don't even need to really know the rules of football to be able to appreciate it. But like CS, you're not going to understand the bomb defusal mode until like you've watched a few rounds, right? Like it doesn't clock for you. So I think there's a very big difference in the kind of user or a consumer that experiences esports. And then they think about why is it so unsustainable for Saudi to do their version of this esports thing. That's because you're asking your audience to come to you with incomplete information, to try and get as much information as they can, to make their own decisions about how they feel about it, and to continue to engage with you. As soon as they discover things that are sports washing, like you're erasing LGBTQ voices, you're oppressing women, you're abusing migrant slave workers. Those are things that then, as soon as people are aware of them, they have to choose to ignore it, to accept it, to try it on, or to throw it away. And if you have an audience who's really good at choosing things and working with incomplete information, they're going to naturally kind of choose the egalitarian, good for them, feel good answers and things that are, better. And so, yes, lots of people did not tune into Esports World Cup that otherwise would have. And so much of their numbers are manufactured and propped up on little tiny mobile games and not the actual spectator sports of video games, which is crazy. So it's these manufactured audiences, right? It's these artificial numbers. It's all this bullcrap to try and convince people that this is something worth watching, that this is an impact on culture, when really it's not impacting culture. People who have kids who care about esports and whose kids might care about esports in the future aren't tuning in because they don't want to engage in those choices and that information that they were given. And so it's not sustainable to go and promise that you're changing when what you're actually doing is prioritizing your GDP growth at any cost and not fulfilling any of those changes and values that you're promising that you're going to do. It's not sustainable because essentially you're kind of distracting everybody saying, hey, look at all the cool things we're capable of while you're just trying to cash checks for yourself. You're not actually fulfilling upon the vision or the goal. And so it's not sustainable because their audiences are fake. They're subsidizing everyone who comes there. I mean, your ticket is paid, your meals are paid, your hotel is paid, your flight to and from, like everything is not at your bill. It's at Saudi's bill. And so it's not Saudi getting other people to come and spend their money in the country. It's Saudi money spending its own money on itself in the country, which is not actually how you grow an economy. You need to get foreign involvement in and money coming in. And fundamentally, if you're feeding everybody and paying for their hotel and all that, where are you taking their money as a business? You're not. So subsidizing things for the next 10 years is definitely not going to work because as soon as you stop subsidizing things, your partners who you're paying their employees to come show up are gonna feel as happy because they're like, well, the deal changed. It was workable for us and it fit into our budgets when it was this, but now that you're asking our employees to pay for this, we're only gonna send 2 people, not 50. And so subsidizing it isn't sustainable. The cultural piece of it isn't sustainable when you're doing awful things and asking people to celebrate them. Like no one's comfortable clapping if they actually know what's going on. And then it's not sustainable because you're not actually building an ecosystem in games. So this is the big answer I was trying to get to initially, because outside of all the esports, outside of all of the reasons that Saudi Arabia is not a good place to do this, they just aren't doing it. They are doing predatory acquisitions. They're doing predatory buyouts. They're saying what companies are available for sale that we can just buy, sort of like Facebook buying WhatsApp and Instagram, and not actually having any real plans for how these integrate into their grander social network or offering or experience. It's monopolizing. It's trying to control the world and say, well, we could set where the bill is, and it's awful because monopolies stagnate. They underserve. They artificially inflate prices, and it's awful. Like monopolies are not good for anybody. So, and we know they're not sustainable. But even pulling it away from being a monopoly and being so centralized in Saudi, there's no reason for it to be in Saudi. There's no infrastructure, there's no elements that give it there other than we have the cash to go buy these things. So again, it's very predatory. It's very aggressive into an industry that they never belonged in before, and it's very forced is the feeling, right? Which is not good. That's full of conflict. It's forced socially and physically and infrastructurally and economically, and that's not good. We aren't fitting things together naturally. It's unsustainable because they're not actually planning an ecosystem. They buy these companies with no plans of how they're going to support Scopely, of how they're going to integrate Neontic, of how these companies are going to play with each other or act as an ecosystem or be a flywheel. You can't build an ecosystem by going to PetSmart and buying every plant and animal and thing that you see and putting it in your house and being like, boom, I have an ecosystem I built. This is my terrarium. No, you actually need to consider what is the soil that I'm putting in there? What are the plants that I'm going to put in there? What is that atmosphere going to be looking like? What's the humidity it's going to cause with having these plants and animals in here? Can this animal survive in such an environment, right? Is it going to give life? If I have too many wolves in this environment eating deer, and then I run out of deer, I'm going to lose all my wolves and my predators, and then I'm going to lose my biodiversity, and I'm going to have no animal life. Like thinking about it environmentally, they're not building an ecosystem at all. They're saying, "Hey, that's a really cool giraffe from Africa. Let's buy that giraffe and put it at our zoo. Oh, hey, that's a really cool gorilla. Let's go buy that gorilla. Hey, that elephant from India is really cool. I really like its tusks too. Or bring me 500 more tusks because we're gonna make a tusk themed cafe out of this new IP that we brought into our ecosystem. Like it doesn't make sense and it's awful. And it's saying like you're not building an ecosystem here, you're building a zoo for your prince to go walk through and say, you know what, I'd really like it if the gorilla enclosure was pink instead. And now we have this version of The Sims that is tied to this very centralized, non-consumerist, kind of monopolized vision of what the experience could be. And so it's so opposite of what you should be doing if you were trying to enter a new industry or pivot your economy. They're not pivoting their economy. They're trying to buy a new economy. That doesn't work. You can't do that. No, that's never been done historically before successfully by any means. You can try and convert the worldview, but you can't go buy a new economy. And it certainly wouldn't last. I mean, you could ask people to show up for your party, but they're going to go back home and spend their time at home and the money that you gave them at home. So it's not sustainable at all because the people behind this, and they're so funny whenever they put out these PR announcements for anything game related, and you go see the people post about it on LinkedIn, they're all excited about it. Like they're not standing on anything than funny numbers. They're like, hey, the funny numbers here are so big. It's cool. We're doing a $55 billion acquisition. And then you're like, okay, well, let's have an actual professional like Amir Satva going and throwing some numbers together just to say, what does that actually look like when you break it down, and how does this sort of deal shake out for that number that we feel so excited about? And that $55 billion acquisition and all this debt repayment and the structure of it says we're going to need to lay off 1,000 to 4,000 employees. That is so backwards. If we are talking about building new games and building an ecosystem, we need contributors in that ecosystem. And job loss hurts us so much in this ecosystem building. Why? Because as soon as we lose jobs, that's less people spending money in our economy and from our economic efforts. Okay, so they're losing jobs. What does that actually mean? We're producing less things. That means we're being less effective economically and we're not at the scale that we once were. What else does that mean? That we're getting rid of people? Those people go elsewhere, they compete with us, or they leave the industry and they get burned on the market share and they share that story as part of our reputation. What else does that mean that we're cutting out all these people and paying ourselves this new debt? It means that we've taken a company that maybe wasn't actually kind of stable and we've set up a deal where we're expecting a stable return on our investment and the debt that we've created around it because it's a successful company, and not accepting the reality that a company like EA is very complex and has all of these shifting and moving parts and is realistically competing in a very tough market that has things like Xbox Game Pass and GTA 6 and Helldivers and PlayStation and a smattering of other online games and Epic and all of this competition. There's nothing to say that EA for themselves was sustainable or going to stick around forever. If they flop their IPs, they'd be in a very similar boat to Ubisoft. So we're like trying to set up this deal that says, hey, this huge cash king in games is going to pay us cash year over year and pay this debt that we've created for them, and we'll own them without doing it in a way that makes sense or is meaningful or pushes people towards that sense of success. So that's why they're unsustainable. It's a long answer, and there's so much more we could go into. But the short of it is that they aren't doing it with an actual plan. They aren't bringing in companies to be sustainable, and they're doing it in a really, frankly, offensive way.
Thank you for your answer, Zachary. We have so many more insights for the audience as we get into more, not just, I would say, complex questions, but more relevant questions to video games, esports, and how you can actually develop your master strategy plan for 2025 and beyond. Specifically for self mastery, these questions are going to be tailored more for Zachary because he's the professional I know can answer them responsibly, and I trust him 100% to do this. So, the next question we have is, do you have case studies for your belief framework? Oh, you're muted, Zachary.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, we had talked a little bit about the sports diplomacy, and I think it's something that people underappreciate a lot, but is case studied very well through history. Sports diplomacy is saying that we could bring cultures of people together through sports and use that as an engine or an asset to ongoing diplomatic efforts. So you could imagine rising tensions between a country could get diffused with a sporting event where people come together and they see each other's athletes and they compete in a fair arena and get a result. It's not the actual diplomats sitting down and signing papers sort of diplomacy, but it is very much involved and very much involved in how people see each other and basically the theaters that these diplomats are given to then go do diplomacy. They can't do diplomacy if there's not people supporting it and vision around appreciation of the cultures. So there's a lot that is involved in diplomacy and it's a very complex subject. And I in no means pretend to be a super subject matter expert on diplomacy, but I do read, understand, research, consider, analyze a lot on the intersection of sports and diplomacy. So when we're thinking about the history of this goes back all the way to the classical era of Greeks competing against each other in wrestling and various competitions to show, hey, I'm the strongest, hey, I'm the best, I'm the fastest. And that turned into the Olympics, a sort of religious kind of celebration competition under the view of the gods and ultimate judges who put us on this earth to live and in a way celebrate them as well. So it's a very like interesting cultural event, and that has persisted as a brand to our modern day. We have the Olympics every 4 years, Winter and Summer Olympics, games that we come together and nations around the world compete and observe each other in these halls, and we crown victors and we do all of this stuff, and it raises tensions, it gets people talking. The Olympics is totally based in the values of sports diplomacy. That's its invention was saying, how do we go and appreciate this classical form of entertainment as a way of bringing the world onto the same page? And so it's rolled into lots of globalist efforts, lots of other things. But the Olympics is a great case study of why sports diplomacy, how did we get the sports diplomacy, where is it today? And many case studies throughout history. So in the 1970s, there's an athlete, I believe she was a track and field athlete. She did multiple sports. Let me see, what was her name? I believe it was Olga, and um, Olympian. Find my source here again. Yeah. So Olga Korbut, she won four different gold medals between the years of 1972 and 1976. And she had an incredible impact on the world, but at a time of huge international tensions called the Cold War, she made a really big impact as a Russian female on the American people. There's a very famous picture of her smiling, and it was printed and put in magazines all over the world. And it's of her just smiling at the competition and being successful, and it won over people's hearts because at a time where misinformation and propaganda is at its peak, and there's this attempt to divide American and Russian cultures, to view them as oppositional, this person's smile and efforts in achieving at a sports diplomacy event in the Olympics inspired so many people and diffused Cold War tensions and brought a lot of people to kind of say, well, what if that was my daughter up there in the track and field smiling and winning? Wouldn't I be cheering? Wouldn't I be so excited seeing their smile? And it changed how Americans viewed Russians as this cold people that are so opposite of like traditional feminine values and are so violent and based in this twisted sense of socialism, that like they're so evil in our heads. How could we clap and smile for that? But we do because we feel compelled to because it was such an exciting achievement, an event, and we felt like we were there with that person and we could see ourselves in that person's experience. So sports are hugely important to diplomacy because sports diplomacy in the modern world and since Roman bread and games has been the number one medium to put someone else's culture on grand display and to show it to someone else and expose them to something about culture that they may not have otherwise been able to appreciate or empathize for or see themselves in. So it's a wonderful tool for spreading empathy, care, sportsmanship itself, and to get people talking about things that matter beyond uh, kind of what our preconceived notions, feelings, and information is.
Thank you for your response, Zachary. I want to preface everyone in the audience. There are actually multiple types of empathy. So there's warm empathy, the empathy you use with your family, friends, loved ones, etc., when you're embracing them and you're protecting them using sports diplomacy. And then there's the kind of empathy that Saudi Arabia and their government uses within gaming and esports specifically. It's called cold empathy. They use that in a predatory manner to make these mergers and acquisitions happen. And they don't actually have a master strategy plan. They don't actually have sports diplomacy. They don't actually have a tactic to keep you or many other characters and organizations safe because they're not using warm empathy with you. They're using cold empathy to get what they want. And that doesn't factor in human rights. That doesn't factor in anything regarding your safety as an individual on this earth. So you have to be extremely careful, everyone in the audience, when you're dealing with predators in nature. There's warm empathy and there's cold empathy. Saudi Arabia is using cold empathy, so you cannot trust them based off of the plans that they have or the numbers that they're representing because it's not using warm empathy. So moving on to the next question. As we get more specific, Zachary, I'd like for you to explain what a monopoly is in terms of Saudi Arabia controlling 50% of the esports ecosystem.
Yeah, totally. So a monopoly is whenever you have a, majority or controlling force on a market. And in this case, the market is esports, and that's defined as electronic entertainment events, especially around competition. Could not be, but it's generally around any form of competition. This is speed running. This is professional video games leagues, small regional tournaments, local fun events, all of that kind of qualifies as esports. You could think the football industry, football or soccer industry, right? That covers every kind of one who's involved in making the products to playing the products to people involved in like the youth activism stuff. So it's all around, right? It's a big industry. So a monopoly is the controlling force, or is a controlling force of the entire market because they own a majority of the market share. So it was, there's been a few different monopolies in the past, things like General Motors Company or things that are like so huge that they start to unfairly manipulate the market is the general notion. So see monopolies all over the place. Google and Apple were to have considered had a monopoly on like digital consumer platforming through Google Play and the Apple App Store. Um, and kind of monopoly on phones would be another way to put it. And so monopolies can be kind of like bipartisan or fractional or organized in different ways. But the idea is that the monopoly is kind of the entity or collection of entities that is um, controlling of a market. It's not always the market leader. The market leader is not always a monopoly. Sometimes there's tons of competition, right? Like I wouldn't say Samsung, has a monopoly on phones or Androids, but they're certainly the market leader of Android phones. And then so again, you've got to appreciate that like monopolies don't always look the same. They don't always function the same. They're not always necessarily inherently a bad thing. Like there's nothing that says this is necessarily a bad thing. They usually perform in bad functions because in a cronyist sense, they are manipulating the results for their favor. So monopoly on esports would mean that we control the games that are being produced and being played as spectator sports, right? We control the development or the publishing of them in some regard, which they definitely do. We control the events, the actual arenas where these things are being played and the streams and broadcasts that they're being sent out on. And that we have an ability to influence the regulatory bodies behind this and all of those things. Right? Like that's what constitutes a monopoly is that you have the control over all of those aspects of the market, or it's serious ability to steer and manipulate them towards your favor. So when they have a monopoly on esports, that means they've acquired pretty much any mobile game that at all does anything esports or has significant community. That's the vision of Scopely, right? It's like let's get all this money that's going on in advertising and mobile games and cash cow off of it. So there's some esports control there. They just got EA, or they're acquiring EA. That's Apex. They are running Esports World Cup, which is now a brand claiming to be the World Cup of esports, and essentially claiming that they are going to be the market leader on esports. They aren't calling themselves a monopoly, right? They're saying we're going to market lead esports and esports events. So in terms of inventing in leagues, really they're the biggest right now. I don't know anyone else who comes close. I would say, Riot Games is a lot more successful than they have been. Their events are well more attended. They're clearly real audiences. There's better competition. There's less cheating in Riot Games esports than there was at EWC, and it's a better event, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that Riot Games is the market leader in esports or monopolizing themselves. And that what they're doing is they're trying to control the broadcast to the development and publishing of it. Meaning, even if your game isn't owned by Saudi, for you to have your multiplayer game be involved in the Esports World Cup and the world's largest tournament, right? You need to abide by our streaming and regulation laws and our tournament rules and laws, which becomes a monopolistic force, right? This isn't just them saying, "Hey, Epic, you need to not," or even NetEase with Marvel Rivals or whoever, you need to not let these skins be displayed on the tournament. No players can access them for a tournament, whatever, right? Like it goes beyond that because now what's fundamentally changing with this monopolistic force is because we're the only big international tournament and you have to abide by our rules and we're owning and buying every single other person competing with us in a predatory fashion. You have to abide by our rules, meaning we want you to change something, Epic Games, about Fortnite so that we can feel better about streaming it here in Saudi, or maybe it integrates with our business or it does something that we want. You have to conform to that. Otherwise, we're not going to let you on the grand stage. And so this creates a very intense dynamic where anyone who doesn't have the infrastructure to do arenas and broadcasting and the events show running of esports can't compete with them. No, Epic Games can no longer do esports in the same way because they need to bend down and say, well, what is the Saudi influence and leadership telling us to do? Right? It's the same thing in mobile markets, right? You don't go and create a new phone or app like operating system. When you're a phone manufacturer, you go and you integrate Android, right? And that's the thought, that's the notion. And even from there, it's like, well, you don't necessarily go make your own Play Store unless you go do it, and then you're distancing yourself from Google. And so there's so many conceits and influences on are you able to do your business the way you want to when the market leader is forcing standards and their kind of monopolized view of how the market should work onto your business. So it's incredibly impactful when we talk about it as a monopoly, and it very much constitutes a monopoly because they're trying to control it end to end, especially without any real goal, and from a place where they control all of the regulation and rules behind the consumer experience of esports.
Thank you for your response, Zachary. The next question is, what are the most important skills for a game developer to learn specifically on artificial intelligence?
Yeah, this is a great one. One is cloud computing. So most artificial intelligence happens in the cloud, as I said. You're going to absolutely need to understand the economics of this because they will deeply change how you service your live service game, the prices that you set, how you facilitate your multiplayer game modes. Um, an increase in connectivity and general consumer connectivity allows us to do things like battle royale game formats where we can have 1,000 people join the same server and all play on one giant map. Epic pioneered this technology, right? So when you need to know about AIs, it's deeply embedded in cloud computing. We're thinking about integrating AI into game experience. You have to question, is this AI running in the cloud and therefore going to need a gas fee, some sort of coins or tickets or subsidized cost thereof abstracted away from the consumer? Or is it going to run locally on their machine? And then what are the extents of that? And how are we balancing those resource costs as we're asking their GPU to start running other operations, not just the game? So there's one side on it where you need to understand the cloud and that piece of AI. I think the second piece is you need to understand the sort of Luddite consumer view of anti-AI and understand that just because we can do something in an automated way doesn't mean the automation will yield desirable results. So this is a really deep principle for game design. You can imagine designing automated systems in your game may not always produce a desirable result, whereas curating something yourself instead of doing it generatively might. So there's deep consideration in not just oh, automation is cool and something that we can do, but you need to deeply question why are we automating something? Why are we asking our developer teams to go and use AI instead of doing traditional engineering as maybe they have done for the last 5 years? Um, if you're not asking why with AI, you're losing the picture and you're failing your communication with other people. AI is inherently too broad of a term to be useful. It might as well just mean tech. Tech and AI practically mean the same things. You need to distill in your communications what you're talking about when it comes to anything related to AI. Is this automation? Is this machine learning? Is this computer vision? Is this analytics? Is it machine growth where we're doing reinforcement algorithms that make it better over time? Or is this personalization, right? Is that why we're using AIs to help personalize the game experience to someone? So I think it's always very important to kind of try and use the AI term as little as you can and really focus on the like why around it. And then the final thing you might need to know about artificial intelligence in games um, is that I don't think anyone has the right answer yet. I think we are fundamentally asking ourselves if our web form based interaction method with computers is the best, is the most easy to keep fairly accessible, is the most evolutionary into things like glasses and spatial interactions. And it's not. Web form is not satisfactory. And we have to say, with artificial intelligence making us question these things, how do we stay open and keep doing new things? I think on one end, there is some value to just accepting the like, AI is kind of here and we can do some interesting things with it. Let's fuck around and see what we can do with it. But on the other end of that, questioning why you might want to do a certain thing or why something is actually novel to do it with AI versus doing it manually, procedurally, or contractually, or any other way of producing that service or product.
Thank you, Zachary, for your response. This next question, I thought it was a fun one because nobody's really asked a professional gamer like yourself this question before. So, how do you, as a professional gamer, adapt to a world where you're in a Ready Player One future, specifically for your job or career?
Hmm. So the question is, how do you adjust?
Correct. How would you adjust? How would you adjust in that Ready Player One environment?
Mhm. So number one thing is networking. I know people labor on this all the time when it comes to any sort of career advice or any of that, but you even see it in the Ready Player One world. What what made our protagonist enabled to win was not that he was the one. That didn't have actually anything to do with it. What mattered, what enabled him to win, was the people that he surrounded himself with, the other significant players of the universe and people competing, and doing it in a way where they were able to communicate with each other, to share information, to understand what their goals were, and even place themselves as separate from maybe the people who aren't in their group or networking in the same way, and say, what are they doing that's different from us? And is it competitive? Is it oppositional? What does that mean? So yeah, they were able to coordinate successfully in Ready Player One because he had done that networking and he had assets, people he could go ask. So that's their number one thing, is go ask for help. No one's ever going to have the perfect answer. Me talking now might not help someone 5 years in the future who got their job removed by AI. What you've got to do is you got to go talk to the other people who are around you who are experiencing similar things, or maybe have secondhand sources that they can share. So don't be alone. That's the biggest thing. It's like you are in a world so full of people and other people's thought capacity that you can rely on that and use that as an asset. Ask people questions, ask for mentors, ask for help, because no one was meant to do it all alone. Certainly, you are not meant to do it all alone. If you were meant to do it all alone, you wouldn't be working a job with a role. You would be doing independent contracting, or you would be working for yourself, or you wouldn't be involved in an economy. Fundamentally, if you are working a job in an economy or a role or function in an economy, it's social, it's based on other people. So that's your number one, because no one's going to have the best answers. You've got to get a bunch of other people's information and synthesize something for yourself. So that's number one. Number two, um, there's so much that the computer is really good at that is opposite of what we're good at. We're not very good at putting all of these numbers in our head and doing massive calculations and like finding an optimal solution. But we're really good at feeling stuff out, for making judgments, for supporting other people. So no matter what you do, there will be job security in certain things more than other certain things. You're going to have a lot more job security in jobs that are social or people to people as AI becomes more of a thing. You'll have a lot more job security. And when I say people to people, I don't mean just social, right? Like this, like if you are a coroner, your job is not necessarily going to be displaced by AI. We could totally imagine AI autopsies in an ultimate future, but like that still doesn't necessarily replace the idea that people will pass, and that we will need specialists to handle and take care of people when they pass. That's a pretty good job security. You can think there's not very much job security in the saying, well, our business or my role works specifically with SQL data in this thing. It's like, well, if literally everyone moves away from sequential data to, unstructured data, then like, where's your job security, right? Where's your business's security? So I think on one end, you've got to think about what are the actual kind of entropic forces in life that are supporting you in your career. And make sure you protect those, because if regulation changes, that changes something that you thought, like, oh, my job was guaranteed by law, but then regulation changes, well, your job security's gone away. So on one hand, you kind of need to be aware of like the forces that are supporting you or supporting what you're hoping to grow into with your career. Finally, I would just say, be fair to yourself. Like things are always changing and restructuring. People are always failing. Organizations are always failing. Some are succeeding, some aren't. Don't make it that your role was replaced with AI or someone else's innovation or anything like that mean that you are lesser as a human being or that you aren't useful in a society or anything like that. That's not what it means. It just means that we're needing to place you somewhere else. You're needing to place yourself somewhere else, and that you still have value as a human, and you still have value in an economy and in a contribution cycle where things grow and things change. Like even if tomorrow an autopsy machine was invented and it was really good, we still wouldn't replace all coroners overnight. It would be a process. And so you could think there's still a lot of work to be done in maintaining legacy and even closing out and sunsetting legacy gracefully.
Thank you for your answer, Zachary. So as we get to these last two questions here, you kind of touched on this before with your Saudi Arabia discussion. The question is, the Saudi Public Investment Fund has acquired EA, giving them a chokehold monopoly on half of the esports industry. If tomorrow they made a mandate family-friendly loot boxes or banned skins in Fortnite, do you think game developers will bend to the blood money, break under pressure, or bolt to indie game development?
That's a great question. I think yes, you would see some people kind of resisting the regulatory efforts in that way. It wouldn't be universal. Like I said, I think there's monopolistic pressure and market pressure on some of the companies to comply. And that's what's very dangerous, right? Because then if it's proved that all of these major companies or industry players will comply, um, then the boundaries can be pushed. Extreme measures can be taken because people will comply, and the monopolistic force is proven to be true. So on one hand, yeah, it's not good, and people will comply. On the other hand, there will be some resistance. You will see people go elsewhere. You will see the power of protest take action. I mean, already um, the numbers for the viewership, as much as they like to talk about the total ones, were really small on some certain titles and big games like Counter-Strike or League of Legends that should have had larger viewership because people were protesting with their attention. They were not tuning in to these games. And you'll see the same thing. Consumers are already coordinating on canceling, Sims 4 DLC and content that comes out and abandoning Apex Legends, abandoning the game Skate online. So the Skate community has very ripe for a new game developer to come in and make a new Skate game that is ethical and is not blood money. Same for FC Sports, right? Football Manager has gotten super successful as FIFA has slidden into disgrace, as EA has overcharged and abused consumers with predatory monetization. So strange monetization, strange regulation coming out of Saudi will totally push people away, not just consumers, but yes, developers and major publishers as well as they seek to not enable a monopolistic force.
And to tack on to that, Zachary, personally, would you ever consider developing video games for Saudi Arabia and their esports initiative?
Um, yes, would I consider? Totally. I am not Islamophobic. I have no ill will towards any Saudi Arabian person I've met. I've got none of that to me. There's no hate in no hateful bone in my body, as they say, right? So um, I'm totally open to collaborating with Saudi ecosystem in esports, provided it's done ethically and provided that it's sustainable, right? I'm not going to go and risk my own business and the values that I'm putting down by associating with someone who I think is working against those values. I'll sit down, I'll have a conversation with them, I'll negotiate, I'll do all those things. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to work with them. The work demands mutual respect, and if I think they aren't mutually respectful of some of my values. I don't believe in slavery. I don't believe in the abuse and re-domestication of African people. I don't believe in the generalized oppression of women as something good. I don't believe in some of the fundamental things that are to them enshrined in law. And that's okay. I don't need to agree with everything. It doesn't need to be one to one, but what it needs is the fundamental respect to be there on both sides. And so if I think there's someone, a potential business partner, who's not very respectful of women, I'm not going to be inclined to work with them. And I don't ever want to be put in a position where the market forces demand that I must work with them. That would suck, right? Because now I'm selling out my values because of monopolistic and market forces. And personally, for myself working in an industry that's so creative and values based as games, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not short selling the cultural capital of my business for some cash capital. That's no good in my eyes. I do very much believe there is good money and bad money, and a lot of the money in Saudi is blood money, unfortunately. So, would I collaborate with their esports ecosystem tomorrow if I had a game and they asked me to enroll it and start a league under Esports World Cup? No, it's not a system. It's not an engine I think works. Now, if they were to fulfill their branding as the kingdom of change and make changes and be amenable and be diplomatic and be taking people who actually can help them change and making that change, sure. Uh, if it's not sports washing at the any percent GDP growth, but sports washing for the actual root values that the GDP growth is supposed to represent, sure. I'm totally there for a more empowered Saudi youth, for a world where we have esports events that travel around country to country. So there for a world where Saudi women could feel empowered to go and succeed. But currently, that's not the case. And so, I'm willing to work with them to sit down and talk, but to fully work with them means that my needs are being met as well. And so if they're willing to come and meet my needs and the things that I'm concerned about, totally. Until then, I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's positive. And I would rather run my own event, just as GeoGuessr did, right? They protested, their community protested, they withdrew from the Esports World Cup. They ran their own GeoGuessr championships, and it was great. Their community enjoyed the heck out of it. And that's what's needed. Because what would have been the difference for their community to celebrate at EWC? Not a lot. Not a lot of difference because it was about the root value of their community coming together and what that means for their community, and not the GDP percent growth for the company of GeoGuessr. So it doesn't matter that Saudi Arabia's GDP is growing if we can measurably say we are improving the lives of Saudi youth, that we're improving the rights of people, that we're actually building something sustainable, and that we're doing it in a way where we're not squashing people down and asking people to ignore atrocity in name of celebration. So, no, I would not work with them, is the short answer, but the long answer is yes, I would work with them.
Thank you for your response, Zachary. This next question, going back to Ready Player One. If Ready Player One is pitched as the metaverse utopia where everyone owns a piece, they have these digital tokenized assets, we call them in our world. But the platform you're developing with Cosmico Games is more like a sandbox, free, and it's not a fenced environment. So as a game developer, if you could teleport any kid into your game environment right now, what would you show them first? Not the graphics, but the feeling you want them to experience with Cosmico.
Yeah. So to answer really quick, I want to give a contrast, right? Say like in a current game, you launch it online, you go, you talk with people, you do your thing, and it's very much trending towards what we think of with the like a centralized Ready Player One experience, sort of everyone maybe not necessarily owning their piece, but being able to express their piece within a bigger thing. And the feeling of that is very social. It's very empowering. You get to feel connected. You get to feel empowered and capable of the game. You get to feel like you get to prove yourself and your skills and meet other people in the middle. All of that currently happens in games, and it's beautiful. So I very much want to recreate what people get from games now and that current experience. But I don't feel like the relationship between the player and the video game is celebrated enough. And that's something I really want players to take away from my games is this sense of connection with the system. We feel very connected to like a community in a game. Like you might be very connected to your guild in World of Warcraft, but there might be people in the guild who feel more connected to the game or less connected with the game. Some of them might feel like, yeah, the game is really just there as like a support system to what we're doing with the guild. And some people are like, the guild is here to do what's really important in the game, right? And there's this fracture in like the game doesn't always feel like it matters. Like in Farmville, the game never really matters. It matters that like you have this connection with someone else and that you're sharing your farm with theirs and stuff like that. So I want a game that facilitates that connection where the system is involved in the appreciation loop. And it's not just social because I have a community here, that's what the community does, but 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 that the system actually forces a way for you to grow more community, to feel more connectedness, to easier express yourself. And from that, get all of those good feelings and achievements and even the good negative feelings of frustration that you get with games in a way that is celebratory and not isolated or forced or cookie cutter like so many games are today.
Thank you so much, Zachary. That's all the questions that we have on our scheduled plan. Do you have any questions, comments, or concerns for me?
Yeah, Adam, I'm really curious in your perspective, because we talked about so much, right? This is so beyond the scale of what feels like the self and mastery for the self. I'm curious if you have any guiding principles or best practices that people could take away for kind of rebalancing your sense of self against all of the great conflict and happenings like AI and economic shifts like a recession or anything like that. How do you balance that for yourself and your own sense of self mastery as someone who is fundamentally part of the world, but existing as their own agent within the world?
Thank you for asking that. That's an incredible question. So it's a two-part question. The first answer for me would be, excuse me. So the first part would be you have to look at yourself as an agent who has the power to express your reality at will, which means your character, your competency, your competitiveness. It's all a part of your identity. These are things you control. As you said earlier, your reputation is something you don't control. So I don't look at myself beyond my reputation or even at my reputation. I look at my character, my competency, my competitiveness, and then I say, to what degree does my power have the ability to influence and positively use diplomacy in my reality? That's the first part of my answer. And the second part is when I'm looking at other human beings and my relationships with them, I don't just want to look at them as like Saudi Arabia, the cold empathy, the predator, the liabilities here or assets here. I don't want to look at human beings like that or myself. I want to look at everybody with the warm empathy first. And it's not giving people the benefit of the doubt. I'm not saying trust people blindly. Don't do that. I'm saying you want to verify their character, verify their competency, verify their competitiveness, verify all the values, the morals, the ethics, the integrity, the honor that they have, so you understand their belief system, so you understand their nature, so you can better understand yourself. This is why empathy has two parts, warm and cold. You have to be able to use the predator side, the cold empathy, to protect yourself from the person who is going to backstab you, right? Betray you. Then you also have to have the warm empathy so you can protect yourself, be loving and compassionate towards yourself, be loving and compassionate towards other human beings. So that's why it's a two-part answer, and that's how I actually see myself as an agent and other human beings.
I love that. That's a beautiful answer, and inspires my next question. If we were able to get someone who maybe, has a very different view than myself on Saudi Arabian esports. Like, let's say someone significant at Esports World Cup Foundation, or even all the way up to like MBS himself was able to join us for a podcast and give their own opinions here. What game, if we were to play a game with this supposed person, like MBS joining us on a podcast, do you think would be most useful for facilitating the warm empathy that would allow all parties to kind of appreciate each other's perspective, goals, intentions, and kind of actions around Saudi Arabian esports?
Another great question. Thank you for asking that, Zach. So it's going to sound silly at first because I like to break things down from first principles in gaming. So I don't think about complex games like League of Legends or chess. I just think about super simple human nature games like when you're a child and you're first learning how to walk. So one of the first games you actually learn as a human being is the difference between walking and running and then learning to walk and run with other people, your friends and your family. So I would do that with MBS. I do that with the Crown Prince. He'd be like, "Hey, let's go for a walk. Let's go for a run together, and let's actually uh, sweat. Let's actually feel the earth underneath our feet together, so we can, have that communal value because that's what we lose in esports nowadays, the physicality. And so I want to bring the physicality back. I want to say, hey, this one time, I know you're the Crown Prince. I know you have your kingdom to look after. But this one time, let's put down the Steam Deck, right? Because he's super famous on Steam, and let's actually pick up some running shoes. Let's go outside. We'll take Zachary with us, and we'll have a great discussion walking around the kingdom. We'll have a great discussion, running to some local coffee shops or somewhere where we can just commune together with our physical bodies because that's actually how you experience that warm empathy. You have to develop that physicality because you can't experience that as deep on a screen. You don't actually get the brain chemicals like oxytocin as much on the screen.
Yeah, very, very interesting. When you were first initially talking, I was thinking of like playing red light, green light, where you're running and then you have to stop, and you're running and you have to stop. And it's like a fun game. And I really like how you introduced the physical game element. And I think that would be such an interesting experience to say, let's not just sit down and have a podcast like we're, trying to be super intellectually developed and come to some great conclusion. Um, but like to actually break the mold and say like let's use our physical selves in some sort of collaboration and then have those conversations and talk like let's achieve something mutually. And I really like that perspective, and I do think even MBS would like that perspective as well, if he ever tuned in and listened to us chat here. My next question for you is, um, I'm sure there may be lots of business people or technologists, or random people in yours and mine's network who maybe don't care as much about esports, and they're really here to pick up on kind of some of the side details and understand esports for themselves. But there's a whole other audience that in both of our networks really is passionate about esports. They either play themselves or they work in the industry, or they have someone maybe very close, immediate in their family who does. So I'm curious for those kind of people, for the people who are primes for esports, who've maybe kind of seen the writing on the wall for a few years now. Um, Curious your perspective on how they can be creating career security for themselves. Because we talked about job security, or I talked about job security earlier, about like how you have to kind of identify the forces, right, that are supporting you in that job existing. And so, in your perspective, what could an individual athlete or someone who's maybe close to an athlete or someone working in esports do to help kind of be more tolerant of the conflict or diffuse some of conflict or spread awareness or just kind of make the problem better for themselves and their own lived experience and career and ensure that they will have a job next year, 10 years from now, and, enough money to get a 30-year mortgage, those things, right?
Awesome question, Zach. So I was actually speaking with a friend of mine about this earlier in terms of the specific skill, and it is self-awareness. That's how you actually build leverage as a human being. You have to have self-awareness. So this relates back to personal development. So you have certain skills and or beliefs tied to personal development. So the first one is aspirations, second is self-awareness, third is self-knowledge, and then identity, talent, potential, human capital, quality of life, and dreams. So these all encompass your personal development. And so how you actually develop your self-awareness is having the ability to ask these tough questions is how do you analyze your abilities and your potential? Well, you actually have to look at the failure rate in your life, your mistakes, the things that you messed up. Then you have to look at your adaptability quotient. So the things that you've actually been able to overcome successfully and change about your character, your competency, your competitiveness, the things that aren't your reputation, but your actual identity that you've changed about yourself in order to evolve and adapt as a human being in what we call the game of life. So, in the game of life, you have the lifestyle net worth, which is the ecosystem of your life. The health, wealth, love, and happiness are the four major pillars of your lifestyle net worth. These are the four major games of life which you need to learn how to win in order to better prepare yourself so you can actually evolve and adapt and have a sustainable, ethical, and all the other beliefs and values that you have to get job security, to create job security, to have career security, to have business security, even protecting yourself and your loved ones. Self awareness is how you actually develop this. And the issue is when people look at skill development, they're trying to waste time looking at 5, 10, a whole bunch of different skills, and they don't actually fit your personality. They don't actually fit your adaptability quotient or your belief system or the set of talents that you have as a human being. They don't actually do the one or two most important things which actually fit you. And so, no multitasking. Don't try to do that. Instead, just look at your rate of improvement as you look at one specific skill set or maybe two specific skill sets over time, and then your rate of improvement as you actually climb those four pillars: health, wealth, love, and happiness, your lifestyle net worth. So that's the first part of answering your question. Now, the second part is really building self awareness, is tracking your behavior and then being able to take a mental note of your energy levels and then evaluation of your losses and extending your time horizon. So you have all these things encompassing your job security, career security, and even personal life security, family and friends included, you have to learn all these different skills, all these different beliefs, and you have to be able to plan. You have to be able to actually have a master strategy plan. You actually need self mastery, and you need someone like Zachary to help teach you these frameworks, these principles, so you can actually make this sustainable in your life.
It's a great answer. Adam, this conversation has been super interesting. I think there's still so much that listeners would really, need to and are deeply yearning for, uh, like the lessons that we could share on self-mastery and how it relates to other things we talk about. So, um, as we wrap up here, I just want to ask you one final question of what's one way that self-mastery has benefited you in your life? And I'll just share briefly, for this year, self-mastery has benefited me in my life by, being able to not just cultivate career success for myself, but really for others, and to realize that, like, I have a deep role in how other people, see their own career and their own capabilities and success. Um, Not even necessarily as a role model, but just as, another person out there doing their own thing. And so I've learned for myself that, self-mastery is not actually something that is appropriate to keep to yourself, but mastering yourself very much involves mastering your relationships to other people and to the world.
I agree with you, Zach. So my answer would be self-mastery in my own life, beneficial wise, would be at first I look at the negative polarity. So all the things which I may not like, all the things that make me uncomfortable, all the things that may scare me, I look at the negative polarity of things first because it's just like how the universe works. There's entropy, there's chaos, there's a whole bunch of variables you can't control, there's a whole bunch of things you can't see, like dark matter, for example, and dark energy. You can't necessarily see these things in the universe, but when you look up into space, oh, you know it's there, it's dark. And so you don't actually see the rendering of the objects and the dimensions in dark matter. You don't actually see that in dark energy. That's why when people talk about what you see in the universe, it's only a small percentage because it's in 480p. So people think that there's a world where you don't have self mastery and you may have, let's say you have mental illness and you don't have a bunch of self control. Well, some people think in psychology, you can actually gain that self control. You can actually gain that ability, that skill set. And how do you do that? Well, you actually have to practice pulling from that dark energy, that dark matter. It's something which it exists, but you haven't rendered it fully yet in your field of view in your life. So you have to practice these skills, these beliefs, these frameworks, and then put it into your personal development plan, as I discussed earlier, for self awareness. And then look at yourself in terms of an agent saying self mastery has benefited me as a human being in, well, let's say health, for example. Right now, I have a messed up neck. I can't really turn my head very well, but I've been practicing hot and cold therapy. I've been doing stretches. I've been going for walks around the house, and I've just been taking work off. This is the uh, most work I've done basically the entire week in this podcast. And so a lot of people, when they look at the podcast episode, they won't see how much pain I'm in physically, but like you can see my glasses off now, my face, like I'm tired. I don't have the best rest. I don't have the best relaxation currently because my muscle nerve and my neck nerve is actually pinched. So it's extremely painful, but I'm still here. I'm still happy. I'm still smiling. And that's self mastery. That's not because it doesn't hurt. It's not because I don't feel much of pain. It's not because I'm taking medication. It's because I've worked on myself and I know I think about the world in terms of light, negative, yin and yang. How do I balance these things? And that's why I want other people to look at self mastery as something which you may not have control of your mind or your body all the time, but you can develop that control. You can develop the skills, you can develop the belief, you can develop the frameworks, and that's what self mastery is all about.
That is so beautiful. And yeah, I mean, I mirror that too. There's nothing perfect going on. I don't think mastery is at all some sense of, perfectness. It's the sense that there is not even necessarily an order, but like that it is functional. I think that's what it means to be self-mastery. Self-mastered is to be self-functional and sustaining. So it's a beautiful, beautiful, Adam. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing this conversation with me. This podcast felt super enlightening, and I'm ready to go share it with the world, you know?
Always a pleasure, Zachary. Thank you so much for your time, and I will end the recording there.
All right, sir.